The storm hit Castellan IV like the galaxy had a personal grudge against the colony. Rain hammered the prefab structures of New Haven settlement in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to maybe 3 meters, and the wind made the whole clinic creak in ways that suggested the building was reconsidering its commitment to staying upright. Elias Varn had given up on sleep an hour ago and was instead doing inventory by lamplight, counting antibiotic supplies that were running lower than he'd like. The frontier didn't pay well, but at least it was predictable. Crop accidents, mining injuries, the occasional child with fever, problems he could solve with medicine and patience, instead of the frantic combat surgery he'd performed during his military years. No one shooting at him, no artillery shaking the ground, no young soldiers dying on his table, because they'd been sent to fight over resources or territory or pride. The pounding on his door was so violent it took him a moment to distinguish it from the thunder. Elias grabbed his medical kit by instinct and moved to the entrance, already running through possibilities. Birthing emergency, maybe, or a farming accident severe enough to bring someone out in this weather. He palmed the door control, and it slid open to reveal a figure collapsed on his threshold. She fell forward and he caught her more through luck than skill, her weight nearly taking them both down. Rain poured in through the open door as Elias struggled to haul her inside, his boots slipping on the wet floor. She was tall, easily matching his own height, and heavier than her frame suggested, all of it dense muscle. He got the door sealed and lowered her as gently as he could to the clinic floor. "Lights full," he commanded, and the emergency lighting kicked in, flooding the entrance with harsh white illumination. That was when he saw the blood. Not just a little, enough that he was kneeling in a spreading pool of it, mixing with rainwater in a pattern that made his stomach clench. She was wearing something that might have been tactical gear once, dark material that clung to her like a second skin, but it was shredded in multiple places. Plasma burns, he recognized immediately, the distinctive charred-edge wounds he'd seen too many times during his military service. And worse, deep lacerations across her ribs that looked like they came from clawed hands, the edges too regular to be accidental. She wasn't human. That was obvious even through the blood and damage. Her ears were long and swept back, the tips extending past where human ears would end. Her skin had an undertone he couldn't quite name, and beneath the grime and blood there was a faint luminescence, like light barely contained beneath the surface. Her bone structure was sharper than human, more angular, but not in a way that looked wrong, just different. Elias forced his brain into the familiar patterns of triage. Airway clear, though her breathing was shallow and labored. Breathing compromised, possible punctured lung from the way she was guarding her left side. Circulation, massive blood loss, but her pulse was present at the carotid, stronger than he'd expected given her condition. "Can you hear me?" he asked, already reaching for his kit. No response. Her eyes were closed, her body completely limp in a way that suggested unconsciousness rather than sleep. He worked quickly, cutting away the ruined tactical gear to expose the wounds beneath. Plasma burns across her shoulder and upper arm, severe enough that he could see damaged muscle beneath charred skin. The lacerations along her ribs were deep, and one had definitely cracked bone. He could feel the give when he palpated carefully. More injuries on her legs, her back, evidence of a fight that had been both prolonged and brutal. But as he cleaned the wounds, something caught his attention. The plasma burns, which should have been catastrophic, were already showing signs of healing at the edges. Not normal healing. Accelerated tissue regeneration that he'd only seen in species with enhanced biology or expensive medical augmentation. The lacerations too, though severe, weren't bleeding as much as they should be. Her body was trying to close them even as he worked. Elias fell into the rhythm of emergency medicine, the same patterns he'd performed 1,000 times. Clean, assess, stabilize. He irrigated the wounds with sterile solution, applied coagulant foam to the worst of the bleeding, began the delicate work of closing what her body wasn't already handling. The rib worried him. If it had punctured her lung, she'd need more than he could provide in a frontier clinic. But her breathing, though shallow, was steady, and there was no blood in her airway. 2 hours later, she was bandaged, medicated, and transferred to one of his recovery beds. Elia stood over her, exhausted and covered in her blood, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Her clothes, what remained of them, were made of material he didn't recognize, synthetic but with a weave pattern that suggested serious engineering. The plasma burns came from military-grade weapons, no question, and those claw marks. He'd seen similar wounds during the border conflicts with the Kresh, but this woman wasn't Kresh. Around her neck, hanging on a chain that had somehow survived whatever fight she'd been in, was a pendant. Elias leaned closer to examine it without touching. The metal was unfamiliar, dark and lustrous, and etched with symbols that looked both geometric and organic. They seemed to shift slightly in the light, though that might have been exhaustion playing tricks on his vision. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. This wasn't mass-produced jewelry. It was art or ceremony or both. She had scars, dozens of them, visible now that he'd cleaned her up. Old injuries, fully healed, mapping a lifetime of violence across her body. A plasma burn across her abdomen that must have been nearly fatal when it happened. Blade marks on her forearms, the kind you got from close combat. A puncture wound over her heart that she'd somehow survived. This woman was a veteran of something, though he had no idea what. Elias was checking her IV line when her eyes opened. They were golden, not amber or brown with yellow flecks, but actual gold, with pupils that contracted to slits in the clinic lighting. She focused on him with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step back, and despite her injuries, despite the fact that she'd been nearly dead on his doorstep 2 hours ago, there was nothing weak in that gaze. "You will tell no one I am here." Her voice was rough from trauma and dehydration, but the words were delivered with absolute authority, like someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Elias raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm a doctor. Patient confidentiality is standard. But you need to stay still. You've got a cracked rib and severe plasma burns, and I'd really prefer you didn't tear open anything I just closed." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then some of the tension left her shoulders. "What is your name, doctor?" "Elias Varn, and you are?" Another pause, calculation visible behind those golden eyes. "Kale," she said finally, "just Kale." "All right, just Kale. Can you tell me what happened to you?" "No. Can you tell me if whoever did this might come looking for you here?" She considered that, her gaze drifting to the clinic's windows where rain still battered the reinforced glass. "Possibly, but not tonight. The storm will cover my trail for now." Elias rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 43 years. This was exactly the kind of complication he'd moved to the frontier to avoid. But he'd also taken an oath, and that oath didn't come with exceptions for mysterious injured strangers who might bring trouble. "You need rest," he said. "Real rest, not whatever combat-ready half-sleep I'm guessing you're about to attempt. I'll be in the next room if you need anything, and there's a call button by the bed. Try not to move around too much. I'd rather not have to reclose those wounds." "Why are you helping me?" Kale asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice, like the concept required explanation. Elias looked at her, this strange, scarred woman who'd collapsed on his doorstep in the middle of a storm, clearly running from something violent. "Because you're hurt," he said simply. "That's reason enough." He left her in the recovery room and returned to the entrance to clean up the blood. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the colony, and somewhere in the darkness, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just invited something dangerous into his quiet life. He had no idea how right he was. Morning came with the weak gray light that passed for sunrise on Castellan IV during storm season. Elias woke in his quarters adjacent to the clinic, his body protesting the few hours of sleep he'd managed on the narrow cot. His first thought was of his patient, and he was moving before full consciousness caught up, pulling on yesterday's clothes and heading to the recovery room. Kale was awake. More than awake. She was sitting upright in the bed despite his instructions, her golden eyes tracking the door before he'd even entered. Her hand had been reaching for something that wasn't there, a gesture that spoke of instincts so deeply ingrained they fired even when logic said there was no threat. "You should be lying down," Elias said, keeping his voice calm and his movements slow as he approached. He'd learned during his military years that wounded soldiers fresh from combat needed predictability, not sudden actions. "I have been lying down for 7 hours," Kale replied. "That is sufficient." "Your body would disagree. You lost a significant amount of blood, and that rib needs time to—" He stopped as she shifted and he saw the bandages. "Did you change your own dressings?" "They needed changing." Elias moved closer, noting that she'd done a competent job of it, though she'd used nearly half his sterile gauze supply. "Next time, call me. That's what the button is for." He reached for her wrist to check her pulse and she flinched, barely but enough that he caught it. He froze, hand extended. "I need to check your vitals, may I?" The question seemed to surprise her. She stared at him for a moment, then slowly extended her arm. Her pulse was stronger than last night, rhythm steady. He pulled out his medical scanner and ran it over her torso, watching the readouts with growing confusion. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "What does not?" "Your rib, last night it was fractured, I felt the break, now it's—" He adjusted the scanner, thinking it was malfunctioning. "It's mostly healed. The bone is knitting back together at a rate that should take weeks, not hours." "Good genetics," Kale said flatly. Elias looked at her over the scanner. "That's not genetics. That's either serious biological augmentation, or you're from a species with regenerative capabilities I've never heard of." "Does it matter?" "Medically, yes. I need to know what I'm treating." He set the scanner aside and reached for her bandages. "I'm going to check the plasma burns. I'll try to be gentle, but this might hurt." "Pain is irrelevant." "It's relevant to me," Elias said, carefully peeling back the gauze on her shoulder. The burn that had exposed muscle last night was now closed, new tissue forming at the edges in patterns that suggested her body was rebuilding itself from the inside out. "Remarkable. Whatever your species' healing factor is, it's doing most of my job for me." He worked in silence for a few minutes, checking each wound, replacing bandages where needed. Kale remained perfectly still, but he could feel the tension in her, the constant vigilance that never quite turned off. Her eyes tracked everything: the door, the windows, his hands, the medical equipment. She was cataloging, assessing, preparing for threats that might not exist but that her training wouldn't let her ignore. "You don't trust easily," Elias observed, applying fresh antibacterial gel to the lacerations on her ribs. "Trust is a luxury, or a necessity, depending on how you look at it." He sealed the last bandage and stepped back. "You're healing faster than anyone I've ever treated, which means you'll probably be fully recovered in a few days instead of weeks. But that doesn't mean you should push it. Rest is part of healing." "I have rested for 7 hours, after sustaining injuries that would have killed most people." Elias pulled up a chair and sat, deliberately making himself less imposing. "Kale, I'm not going to pry into whatever situation you're running from. That's your business. But while you're under my care, I need you to actually let me care for you. That means rest, proper nutrition, and not tearing open wounds because you're too stubborn to stay still." Something flickered across her expression, amusement, maybe, or surprise. "You speak to all your patients this way?" "The stubborn ones, yes. I had a miner last month who kept trying to go back to work with a compound fracture, had to threaten to sedate him." "You would not succeed in sedating me." It was stated as simple fact, not a threat, and Elias believed her. "Then I guess we'll have to work with cooperation instead of coercion. Can you do that?" Kale studied him with those unsettling golden eyes, and he had the distinct impression he was being evaluated according to criteria he didn't understand. Finally she nodded once. I will rest for now. Good enough. Elias stood, gathering the used bandages. I'll bring you something to eat. Any dietary restrictions I should know about. I can consume most organic matter. That's not exactly reassuring, but I'll work with it. He paused at the door. The storm is supposed to clear this afternoon. If you're worried about being tracked, that's when you'd be most visible to aerial surveillance. You are observant. I spent 10 years as a military medic. You learn to read situations. He met her gaze. I also learned that everyone has a story. You don't have to tell me yours, but if staying here puts anyone else in danger, I need to know. Kale was quiet for a long moment. The people searching for me are persistent, but they will not attack a civilian settlement. Their methods are more surgical than that. Surgical meaning they'll come for you specifically. Yes. Then I'll keep watch. Elias said it casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world to stand between a mysterious stranger and whoever was hunting her. Why? The question came out sharper than before, edged with genuine confusion. You know nothing about me. I could be a criminal, a deserter. I could bring death to your door. Could be, Elias agreed. But right now, you're a patient who needs care. Everything else is secondary. He opened the door, then looked back. Besides, I've found that people who are actually dangerous don't usually ask if they're putting others at risk. They just don't care. He left her with that, heading to the clinic's small kitchen area. Through the doorway, he could see her sitting motionless on the bed, staring at the space where he'd been standing like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't balance. The rest of the morning passed in routine. Elias had 3 scheduled patients, a farmer with a respiratory infection, a child with a sprained ankle, and an elderly woman who needed her blood pressure medication adjusted. He treated them in the main examination room, keeping the recovery area sealed. His patients knew better than to ask questions about the locked door. Frontier doctors saw all kinds of people who had reasons for privacy. Between appointments, he checked on Kale. Each time, he found her in a different position, sitting upright, standing by the window, doing what looked like stretching exercises that should have been impossible given her injuries. She moved with a fluid grace that spoke of extensive training, every motion precise and controlled. "You're supposed to be resting," he said on his 3rd check-in, finding her balanced on one leg in a stance that looked like some form of martial art. "This is rest. Combat drills would be training." Elias decided not to argue. He set down the tray he'd brought: protein soup, fresh bread from the settlement bakery, and tea. Lunch. Tried to actually eat it instead of analyzing it for tactical value. That earned him what might have been a smile, though it vanished so quickly he couldn't be sure. Kale settled onto the bed and examined the food with the same careful attention she gave everything else. She took a cautious sip of the soup, then another, and Elias saw some of the constant tension in her shoulders ease fractionally. "It is good," she said, and sounded surprised. "Don't sound so shocked. I may be on a frontier colony, but I can still heat soup competently." He leaned against the wall, giving her space. "Can I ask you something?" "You may ask, I may not answer." "Fair enough. Those scars, the old ones. You've been in combat before. A lot of it." Kale's hand drifted unconsciously to the plasma burn on her abdomen, the one that must have been years old. "Yes. Military. In a sense. And the recent injuries, the ones that brought you here." She set down the soup, her expression closing off. "That is not a question I will answer." "All right." Elias didn't push. "But whoever you were fighting, they used serious hardware. Military-grade plasma weapons. Probably custom claws designed for close-quarters killing. That's not standard equipment for random violence. You recognize the weapons." "I've seen their effects before. Border conflicts mostly. The kind of fighting where both sides have more resources than sense." He crossed his arms. "Which means whoever is after you has significant backing, probably government or corporate level." Kale studied him with new intensity. "You are more than a simple frontier doctor." "I'm exactly a simple frontier doctor. I just used to be a complex military medic. Elias moved to check her IV line, his movements deliberately casual. I came out here because I was tired of patching up soldiers so they could go die in the next engagement. Figured I'd do more good treating farmers and miners, people whose biggest threat was accidents rather than policy. Yet you ask no questions about my presence here. I ask medical questions. Everything else is your business. He adjusted the drip rate, noting that she'd need the IV removed soon given her healing rate. Though I will say that for someone who's clearly accustomed to violence, you're remarkably controlled. Most combat veterans I've treated have more aggression. You just have vigilance. Aggression is for those who lack discipline, or those who haven't seen enough combat to know when it's actually necessary. Elias met her eyes. You've been fighting a long time, haven't you? For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across Kale's face. Longer than you have been alive, human. The admission hung in the air between them. Elias processed the implications. Extended lifespan, either natural to her species or through augmentation. Decades, maybe centuries of combat experience. No wonder she moved like violence was a language she spoke fluently. That sounds exhausting, he said quietly. Kale blinked, clearly not expecting that response. It is necessary. Necessary and exhausting aren't mutually exclusive. Elias pulled up the chair again, settling into it. You know what I learned in 10 years of military medicine? That being good at violence doesn't mean you're suited for it. Some of the best soldiers I knew were the ones who hated what they'd become. And yet they continued fighting. Because someone had to. Because they were good at it. Because stopping felt like abandoning the people who depended on them. He smiled without humor. Sound familiar? Kale's expression shifted into something he couldn't read. She looked down at her hands, scarred, calloused, the hands of someone who'd held weapons more often than anything else. You should not waste your compassion on me, Dr. Varn. I am not some tragic soldier seeking redemption. I'm not offering redemption, just basic human decency. He stood collecting the empty soup bowl, and it's Elia's pleas. Dr. Varn makes me sound like I'm about to deliver bad news. Elias, she repeated, testing the name. That is Old Earth origin, yes, meaning the Lord is my God. You know human etymology. I know many things. She settled back against the pillows, and for the first time since arriving, she looked genuinely tired. It is part of why I have survived as long as I have. Elias paused at the door. Get some real sleep, Kale. Not combat rest, actual sleep. I'll keep watch. You cannot protect me if they come. Maybe not, but I can try, and sometimes that matters more than succeeding. He dimmed the lights as he left, giving her the darkness that might let her finally lower her guard. Outside the recovery room, Elias leaned against the wall and allowed himself a moment of honest concern. His patient was healing impossibly fast, carried herself like a weapon with a safety switch, and was running from people with military-grade resources. Every piece of common sense said he should contact the colonial authorities, report her presence, protect himself and the settlement from whatever danger she represented. But common sense had never been his strong suit, and something about the way Kale had looked when he'd called her decades of fighting exhausting, like no one had ever acknowledged that truth before, made him certain that walking away would be the wrong choice. So he'd keep treating her, keep offering gentle care to someone who clearly had no framework for receiving it, and hope that, when the danger finally arrived, he'd made the right call. Chapter 3. The next 2 days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Kale grew restless in the recovery room. On the 3rd morning, Elias found her dressed in clothes from the colony supply depot. I cannot remain in this room any longer, she announced. I am going mad with inactivity. Your wounds are nearly healed. You said so yourself. She gestured at her ribs where the lacerations had closed into pink lines. I am capable of movement. Elias considered this. Her recovery had been remarkable. All right, but stay away from the windows when I have patients. If anyone asks, you're a colleague from another settlement. I can be deceptive when necessary. The morning proceeded normally until his third patient. Elias was cleaning a wound when he heard movement from the recovery room. The teenage patient had gone quiet, eyes darting toward the doorway where Cale stood in shadow. That's a colleague, Elias said casually, observing treatment protocols. After the patient left, Cale moved closer, studying the medical equipment with open curiosity. You work efficiently, she observed. Your hands are steady even with nervous patients. 10 years of practice. He gestured to the equipment. You can come closer if you want. Cale examined the supplies with careful attention. These regenerators are primitive but functional. You're familiar with medical technology. I am familiar with many technologies, necessary when operating across multiple systems. She set down a device gently. Your equipment is outdated by perhaps 15 years, but you compensate well with technique. That's the nicest way anyone's called my clinic backward. Elias smiled. You can relax. No one's coming through that door except farmers and miners. Constant vigilance is what has kept me alive. And constant tension is what will break you eventually. He indicated the exam chair. Sit. Let me check your injuries properly. Surprisingly, she complied. Elias ran diagnostics, watching the readings with professional interest. Remarkable, the rib is completely healed. Bone density actually looks higher than surrounding tissue. Adaptive regeneration. My people's biology reinforces points of injury. He noticed other scars, each one a story. You've accumulated quite a history. Each mark is a lesson, you said, but pain is also trauma. You speak of psychological damage. I speak of being human, or whatever your equivalent is. He stepped back. You can be strong and still carry wounds that don't show up on scanners. Cale was silent for a long moment. What would you have me do? Centuries of training do not simply vanish. I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking if you've ever had the choice to be anything else. The question landed between them. Cale stared at him, her control wavering. No one has ever asked me that before. Then maybe it's past time someone did. The door chimed, another patient arriving. Cale moved toward the recovery room. You don't have to hide, he said. It is safer. She paused. For you or for me, I do not know anymore. That evening during a check-in, Cale asked, why did you leave military service? Elias joined her at the window. Got tired of sending people back to die. There was this kid, 19 years old. I patched him up, sent him back. 3 weeks later, he was on my table again with wounds I couldn't fix. He paused. I realized I'd saved him just so he could die more slowly. I couldn't do it anymore. So you chose compassion over duty. I chose preserving life over facilitating death. Cale turned to face him. Among my people, that choice would be considered weakness. What do you consider it? She was quiet. I consider it brave. To walk away from what you are skilled at because it contradicts what you believe. That requires a different kind of strength. The kind your people don't value. The kind my people do not understand. She looked out the window. We are taught that strength is physical. The idea that gentleness could be its own form of courage is foreign to me. But not incomprehensible. You're thinking about it. I am thinking that you are strange, Elias Varn. You treat a stranger without question, offer sanctuary without knowing the danger. She looked at him. Either you are remarkably naive or remarkably confident. Probably both. That evening, they shared dinner in the common area. Cale ate with more attention than before. This is better than ration packs, she said. Depressingly low bar, but I'll take it. He watched her relax fractionally. Can I ask you something personal? You may ask. You're not just a soldier. You're someone important enough that people with military resources are hunting you. Cale set down her spoon slowly. I have told you I will not discuss certain things. I'm not asking for your history. I'm asking if you've ever had anyone treat you like you were just a person, not whatever role follows you around. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. No. From the moment I was born, I have been defined by what I represent, what I can do. She looked up, something raw in her expression. You are the first being in centuries who has asked what I want rather than what I can provide. That's heartbreaking. That is reality. Doesn't mean it's right. Elias leaned back. While you're here, you're just Kale, nothing more complicated than that. Kale's eyes glistened. You offer me something I did not know I was missing. They finished in comfortable silence. When Kale returned to the recovery room, Elias thought he saw something different in her bearing, perhaps slightly less burdened. He checked the sensors one last time before sleeping. Outside, twin moons rose over the settlement, painting everything in silver light. It was peaceful, quiet. He tried not to think about how that usually preceded catastrophe. The alarm woke Elias at 400. Perimeter sensors screamed warnings about aerial contacts. 3 massive signatures in orbit, holding position directly above the settlement. Kale, he called, but she was already there, fully dressed, her expression harder than he'd ever seen. They found me faster than I anticipated, she said, voice changed. Those are Talar Dominion warships, Elias said, pulling up sensor data. They have enough firepower to turn this settlement into glass. That is a long story. Give me the short version. Kale moved to the window. 3 years ago, the Talar attempted territorial expansion through wars. I was sent to negotiate peace. She paused. When negotiations failed, I was sent to end the conflict through other means. Other means being single combat against their 3 greatest champions, an old tradition to determine disputes without full war. Her jaw tightened. I killed all 3. The Talar consider this unforgivable humiliation. Elias felt his stomach drop. You personally ended a war by killing their best warriors, and now they've tracked you here for revenge. In essence, yes. And you didn't think this was relevant. Kale turned. Would you have helped me if you had known? The question hung between them. Elias wanted to say yes immediately, but doubt must have shown because Kale nodded. That is why I did not tell you. Too late for that. Elias reached for communications. I need to contact colonial authority. They will not attack the settlement. The Talar have strict codes. They hunt me specifically. She began gathering her possessions. I will leave through the eastern perimeter before their ground team arrives. That's suicide. You're still healing. I am always healing, and I have evaded worse. She paused. Thank you, Elias, for treating me as something other than a weapon. It has been illuminating. Wait, Elias moved between her and the door. There has to be another option. You cannot help with this. Why? Because I'm just a human, just a doctor. Because you care. She said it simply. And people who care make mistakes trying to protect what they value. I cannot afford for you to make such mistakes on my behalf. That's not your choice to make. It is exactly my choice. She stepped closer. You asked if I had ever been allowed to choose anything for myself. This is my choice, Elias, to protect you. The proximity alarms shrieked. Drop pods were launching, 12 of them streaking toward the settlement. They are early, Kale said, genuine surprise in her voice. 12 pods means 60 operators minimum. This is not a surgical team. This is an execution squad. Elias felt cold clarity settle. How long until they land? 4 minutes. And until they reach the clinic. 8 minutes. She looked at him. You should hide. I'm involved the moment I open my door to you. Elias activated the colony-wide emergency broadcast. This is Dr. Varn. We have hostile forces inbound. All residents implement lockdown protocols. This is not a drill. Kale stared at him. What are you doing? Making noise. Colonial defense will respond. He turned to face her. And making sure if something happens to me, everyone knows why. You are risking yourself for no reason. I'm risking myself because that's what you do for people you care about. The words came out honest and raw. I'm not choosing the safe option and watching you die. Kale simply stared. Then something shifted in her expression, the careful control falling away. Her posture changed, becoming more fluid and dangerous. You should know, she said quietly, that I am not simply a soldier. I am Keltheros Vamerin, the apex blade, queen of the Ethkorin and the most feared combatant in 17 systems. Her eyes seemed to brighten. I have ended wars through being a force no one could match. Elias felt pieces clicking into place. The apex blade, I thought those were exaggerations. They are usually understatements. She moved toward him. I am telling you this because you deserve honesty. Those soldiers coming, they believe they have overwhelming numbers. They are wrong. You're going to fight them. I am going to remind them why my name carries weight. Her hand cupped his face gently. But I need you to survive this, because you have treated me like I am more than my reputation, and I do not wish to lose that. Then don't throw yourself into danger. I am not throwing myself anywhere. I am standing my ground. Her thumb traced his cheekbone. Trust that I know what I am doing. The alarms shrieked. The pods had landed. 8 minutes until contact. I can't just watch you fight. Then do not watch. Seal yourself in the bunker. Wait for this to end. And if it doesn't end well, Kale smiled, nothing uncertain about it. It will, because I have something the Taller do not account for. What's that? A reason to survive beyond simple survival. She stepped back. I find myself wanting to continue these conversations, to learn if food can be enjoyed, to understand this gentleness you offer. Boots thundered in the distance. Kale moved, not toward escape but toward the clinic's entrance. She stepped outside into the street, standing alone. Through the window, Elias watched them approach, 60 armored soldiers in tactical formation, weapons raised. Their squad leader called out in a foreign language. Kale responded, and whatever she said made them freeze. Then she moved. What Elias witnessed redefined his understanding of combat. Kale didn't fight like a soldier. She fought like a natural disaster with tactical awareness. She covered impossible distances, her movements blurs of precision. When they fired, she seemed to know where shots would be before they fired. But what shocked him most was the restraint. She could have killed them all. He saw moments where lethal strikes were possible. Instead, she disabled, disarmed, incapacitated. Soldiers fell around her, alive but thoroughly defeated. In less than 5 minutes, 60 Taller operators lay scattered, groaning but breathing. Kale stood among them, barely winded. She looked up at the orbiting warships and spoke again, her voice carrying with unnatural clarity. 30 seconds later, the warship's engines flared. They were retreating. The message had been delivered. Kale walked back to the clinic, stepping over unconscious soldiers. When she reached the door, Elias opened it. You destroyed an entire squad in under 5 minutes, he said. I have destroyed worse. Her expression softened. Are you hurt? I'm fine, he gestured helplessly, reminded them why pursuit is unwise. She looked down at her torn clothes. I apologize for the damage. That's what you're worried about. Elias felt hysterical laughter bubbling. Kale, you just fought 60 soldiers. I used your philosophy, disable rather than kill when possible. She moved closer. You spoke of healing rather than facilitating death. I find it has merit. Elias stared at this woman, this legend who could end armies but spent days learning to appreciate soup. Who are you really? I am exactly who I told you, Kale. She took his hand. But I am also Keltheros Vamerin, and those identities need not be separate. You have shown me that strength and gentleness can coexist. I don't understand. I am saying you were right. I have spent centuries being what others needed, but here being treated as simply Kale. She trailed off. I find myself wanting more of that. And your responsibilities. I am queen of warriors, not their prisoner. I have fulfilled every duty. Perhaps it is time I assigned myself new duties. Her golden eyes held his. If you would accept someone like me in your quiet colony. Every rational part of Elias' mind screamed this was insane. But he heard himself say, yes, stay. Learn to enjoy food, be Kale instead of the apex blade. He smiled. But warn me next time before you decimate a military unit outside my clinic. Kale's smile was radiant. I accept these terms, though I should note that attacks of this nature are statistically rare now. But statistically rare isn't never. True, but you chose to care despite the danger. I find that remarkably brave. Or remarkably stupid. Often the same thing. She pulled him into an embrace, her hold gentle despite the violence he'd just witnessed. Thank you, Ilias, for seeing me, for treating my wounds and standing beside me. You are unique among all beings I have encountered. Ilias returned the embrace. Outside, colonial security was arriving. There would be questions, reports, uncomfortable conversations. But for now he held onto something precious, a warrior queen who'd chosen gentleness over glory. I have one condition, he said. Name it. You have to actually rest now. Real rest. Kale laughed, genuine and surprising. Very well, doctor, on one condition of my own. What's that? You stay close. I rest better when I am not alone in the darkness. I can do that. They stood as dawn broke over Castellan IV. Two beings from different worlds who'd found in each other something neither had been looking for. Ilias discovering that strength could choose gentleness, and Kale learning that gentleness was its own form of strength. The quiet colony would never be the same, but then again, neither would they.